Am I in the middle of it? Or can you see it?
You do your job, I'll do mine.
Good job, IT guy. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, let's open up with prayer and we'll get going. Okay. Good evening, Father. Lord, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for summer, for swimming and for fun. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to be able to gather this evening in your name. Lord, we ask this evening that each of us could learn a little bit about defending you, defending our belief in you, Lord, that we can always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that lies within us. Father, we ask that you expand our minds tonight and you use that as an avenue and a path to expand our hearts towards you. That as we can learn more about you and our certainty within you, that we can also at the same time come to trust you more, to love you more, that we feel confident and bold in our faith wherever we go, that no matter which soil we're on and which direction we're facing, that we can proudly proclaim you are Lord and that you love us. Be with me this evening, Lord, that you can speak through me, that you can use my tongue. We love you, Father. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. All right, I want to open up with what questions or thoughts did you guys have around last week? So we talked about a lot. I gave you 5 pages worth of definitions and kind of topics. We discussed a lot about the mind, the importance of the mind in defending the faith. We talked a little bit about tactics. We did the definition of apologetics, defending our faith, and polemics, the difference between those two. We did talk about theology and the study of the Word of God and developing doctrines. And we kind of wrapped up things by a little discussion on philosophy and a discussion on worldview and how important it is to recognize your worldview and to recognize others' worldview to guide yourself in your conversations with those who you may be witnessing to. So did anybody get home and just go, that ain't right? I want to ask that or ask for more explanation on that. That would be first, guys. We did all of that. I know I got any questions or concerns. Okay, good. Well, good. This week we're going to do a little bit talking about apologetics to start off. It is not week 3, by the way. That's a typo on my own accord.
You had a lot of confusion on there.
No, I'm sorry. It's totally me. So this week is week 2. We're going to be defending God's existence. Next week is week 3, and we're going to be doing the defense of Jesus' resurrection and talking about the Bible and why we can believe what is in our Bible. Okay? The following week we're going to do the moral argument, because I think the moral argument is probably one of the most valuable arguments that you could have in your pockets today. And then the last week we're going to wrap up with kind of some controversial issues and topics that are probably topics that people are more willing to discuss, things like abortion and homosexuality and some of these things that are constantly at our front doorstep. But the reason why I don't start with those things is because those things are not getting at people's worldview, right? Those things are getting at kind of the hot topics and political views that everybody can have an argument about and have an opinion about. But if you can find your way through those arguments to the deeper worldview questions that we talked about last week, I think you'll have a lot more value in that conversation in the long run. Okay? Yes, sir.
Is it week 4 of July 4th?
Yes, we're skipping July 4th. Okay? So here's the other kind of practical thing is I am going on a family vacation next week. We are going to Cedar Point. We had it scheduled for like a great part of a year now. So when Darren asked me to do this, I said yes, but I cannot be there on the 27th. And so he is going to teach it next week. I've sent him a lot of material that I already had kind of prepared from a long time ago when I did a class like this. And then I told him, mash it up however you want, just you make it. So he's going to make it his own and teach it kind of how he would like to teach it. But you're going to be with him next week instead of me. And then the following week, you guys are all going to have 4th of July and have a fun time. I won't be here, so don't come. No one will be here. And then the week after, we'll do our last 2 weeks. Yes, sir.
The week after is also VBS week.
Yeah, I was missing it.
As far as I knew from Darren, that was still scheduled, but I I don't know, that part's not,
Probably won't happen, I think they're using this, using it all.
okay.
Well, I don't know, you can check with them.
I thought it was all meat outside this year.
It is, except for,
Yeah, but like half of the volunteers are probably in this room, are they not?
Yes.
Right? I mean, so ultimately, there's 25 of us, right? So I could talk with Darren, but I mean, we can just postpone it another week, right? It's just the last 2 weeks. So, it's not a big deal. We'll figure it out. I'll talk to Darren this week about it, okay? And say, hey, do we, we close this out 3 weeks and figure out where we need to go. So that sound good? And we'll figure out what's scheduled for that following week too. So we'll get week 4 and 5 done by December, I promise. Good. Awesome.
you'll have to do week 1 through 3 again.
Maybe, review sessions, it's good. No problem. All right, approaches to apologetics is what I put in here. There are actually 5, like if you went to Biola University, which is out in California, and studied apologetics, they would give you 5 approaches to apologetics. The last 2 are a little weird and not easy to apply, so I just boiled this down into 3, okay? The first of which is considered the classical apologist. So my dad and I had this conversation out there at the parking lot last week. We were talking about this, and so I thought this would be of value to kind of talk to you guys about. The classical apologist tries to start with prove the existence of God first, and then try to boil it down into that God being our God, okay? So some of the classical apologists' first original arguments very well could be arguments for the Muslim. They could be arguments for somebody who's of Jewish descent, right? They literally are just trying to prove that there is a God. So they're very helpful against the atheist, for instance, and have pretty good value against even an agnostic, somebody who's like, I think there might be something. And you can just say, well, I'll show you with certainty that there is something, right? Another approach is called the historical approach, okay? So then you say, wait, today's arguments will be very much classical apologist type of arguments, okay? And those arguments tend to be things that I gravitate towards because I live in an atheist world. I live in a scientific world and I deal with a lot of atheists and agnostics, okay? So they were very useful to me, so they're ones that I really wrapped my head around and got really comfortable with, okay? The next kind of category is a historical apologist. And those people work very hard to defend the resurrection of Jesus Christ and defend the canon in the Bible. And if they can prove that those have a lot of merit and reality, and that miracles really did happen, and that we have historical evidence that this is something that is just as truthful as George Washington being your president, then they work that direction. And if they still are dealing with somebody who's still kind of wondering if God exists, they can use some other bigger existence of God type arguments. Okay? So they start with the Bible first almost, and proving and moving around the Bible. And then versus the classical apologist starts more with philosophy and science and moving that direction. Both are extremely appropriate. Not one is greater than the other, to be frankly honest with you. And I have utilized both many a times. And that's what I mean by learning the person's worldview that you're having a conversation with. At some point in time, you're going to need to figure out which approach is going to be more important. Kind of the last category is an experiential approach. Okay? This apologist tends to go out there, experience their own personal experience with the religion that they're in as an apologetical defense of what's happening. This has a lot of value. It really does. The value of your testament in a 2-minute snippet is phenomenal. But you have to be careful. Okay? So sometimes, by the time somebody gets to you, if you're having a conversation with a 40-year-old man who's never considered God, how many experiential apologists do you think they've ran across in their lives? How many times do you think that they've heard an experience from that person? Okay? I'm not saying, again, this is extremely valuable, and a lot of times it needs to be segued into the classical and historical apologists. I think if all you did was try to talk about a real heady way of approving God, and then you never moved into an experiential concept, you're probably going to have a hard time getting that person to see what's happening. But I think also we can do a disservice with somebody if we do not share, or if we only share an experiential concept and we don't share an apologetical defense in other aspects too. Okay? An example of this will be the Mormon faith. So the Mormon faith kind of pioneered the concept of feeling a burning in your bosom, is what they'll say. Well, how do you know this is true? You'll ask them. They'll be like, well, just read the Book of Mormon and you'll feel a burning in your bosom. And I'm like, well, I had that when I had Chinese last night too, so how do I know whether this is true or not true, right? I'm not denying the existence of the Holy Spirit. I'm not denying that God certainly calls us in moments to feel Him, to feel close to Him, and to feel that this is true, okay? And those testimonies have extreme merit and value in your conversations with individuals. Sometimes I find, depending on where that person is in their walk in life, it's better to be led with that, or it's better to hold that in your back pocket until you break down some outer defenses first, right? And you maybe make it a viable option that God's possible before you start talking about your own experience with Him. So I want to read a couple scriptures about that, and then I want to stop and I want to ask some of your guys' thoughts or opinions. So in John 14, verses 18 through 23, it says, I will not leave you as orphans, I will come to you. Yet a little while and the world will see me no more, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. In that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. Whoever has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father. And I will love him and manifest myself to him. Judas said to him, Lord, how is it that you will manifest yourself to us and not to the world? And Jesus answered him, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words, and the word that you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me. Very much an experiential concept in that passage, right? Jesus talks very deep. You hear this word used a lot in the church today about a relationship that he has with that individual. And that relationship is key for you guys to share. So I'm not downplaying that at all, right? And I think that that's something you got to be looking to do in your conversations, of being willing and ready to present that relationship and what it did to your life. How did it change you? How did you go from a sinner who was wallowing in your own sins and watch God change that about your life? That's super valuable to share, right? So sometimes apologists can do a really good job of ignoring the concept. They can get really heady and get super classical in their arguments and stay up here pie in the sky all the time and then never boil it down to something personal. And that's no value. But then sometimes in the church we can get really good at just making it personal and only personal, and that's all I'm going to give you. And if you're not going to find this personal connection that I'm trying to present to you, well then see you later. Girls are for swine and I'm going to take off. Right? The last passage here I have in Romans 1:18 through 19, it says, for the wrath of God is revealed to them from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, but God has shown it to them. So this passage specifically talks about a list of sinners and the various sins that they perform, and it tells us that they're not ignorant to the fact that they're doing wrong. They have an experience with God. They just choose to suppress the truth. They choose to not pay attention to it. So let me stop there. Let me ask kind of some thoughts or questions around approaches to apologetics. Anybody have experiences with one or another, or?
I guess I just don't understand the historical, why, in my logical thinking, you would take an approach to prove Jesus first, then God. Explain that to me, why that would work.
It's not my approach, but here's one time that I did it, okay? This is why I had to be good at historical, because I never used to, but I had a neighbor of mine who was Jewish, and a very loose Jewish, like he didn't really follow it very well, but if you asked him, what would you check on your ballot, he would say Jew. So what good is proving the existence of God to that man? But all of a sudden, like everything that I had in my toolbox as far as like Christian apologetics go was worthless, because he could have just used that too on somebody else. That's what he wanted as well. He believed that there was one God, and his name was Yahweh, and so on and so forth, right? So I had to quickly start to learn how to defend Christianity, right? And so that's where I had to start, was historical apologetics. There are some apologists that go so far as, if I can prove the here and the now of the historical credibility of the Bible, and not necessarily just Jesus, but the credibility of the Bible and God and history, then I have better grounds than trying to use the science physical approach that I'll use with you guys today. So it's just kind of an approach. You know, the quote I use often, like I would use it next week, but Darren will be doing it, is how many here believe that the Romans existed? And how many here believe in the Colosseum and what was done in the Colosseum? How many believe in Julius Caesar? And how many believe in Caesar Augustus and Octavian and Mark Antony and all those stories, right? We have 90 total manuscripts that define all of that for us. 90 documents written in various languages that describe that entire historical context that we all know as fact. We have over 24,000 manuscripts on the New Testament alone. That's like a historical approach, right? We're going to look at their own worldview where they believe and trust in something, and we're going to say, okay, you believe and trust in this, so then why don't you believe and trust in this when it has, 24,000 almost more data supporting it.
Where are those?
Most of them are in the Vatican.
Are they?
Yeah, and over in Rome. That's where a lot of them hide. Not all of them, but yeah. Where they live, sorry, you guys know, I'm sorry. Apologize. So Dad, that's what this is like. Dad and I had this conversation. That's where he's kind of passionate, is he likes to more of a historical approach. I just deal with a lot of atheists that believe in science a lot. And even if they're not scientists, that's what they claim and they live on their backbone. So I'm kind of the guy who just is a double agent and likes to use their own philosophies against them. You know, you believe in science and there's that much, then I'm going to use these tools against you to prove that my God exists. Right? And so that's my approach. It's just what I've had good success with. But I've learned over the years too that eventually, like I said, you can boil it down towards experiential too. Because we can argue forward a decade over some of this headier stuff, and if I don't start working towards their worldview, it's going to kind of be a pain. Other thoughts on approaches to apologetics? Okay, I want to talk a little bit about science. Because I am a scientist, I got a BA and a BS in biology before I had to go to vet school, right? That's a requirement for vet school. And I'll tell you this, the world, the American world, and maybe others, have a huge emphasis on science that's probably inappropriate. And I think often if you end up in some of these earlier conversations with individuals that claim that science is the end-all, be-all, you got to really work to break that down. I believe in science, I trust science, we trust science every day in our lives, okay? How many have taken ibuprofen in their lives? Or how many have dealt with, crying out loud, milk on a farm? How much science goes into dairy industry, right? There's science all around everything that we do, okay? It's of value. But there are times in which we have to break outside of the mold of what is something that we can put into a test tube to operate in our everyday lives, okay? So the statement, what can be known, the only thing that can be known for certain is something that science can tell us. That statement alone is operated on quite regularly, I think, in the world. And that statement alone is a philosophical statement. You can't test that. You cannot put that statement. You cannot say the only thing that we know to be true is something scientifically proven. You can't actually put that into a test tube and test it over and over and over and over again until you figure out that it's statistically right. So at some point in time, even in that old philosophy, we had to break off of that and we had to use philosophy to figure that out. So I'm a scientist. And in some of these arguments, I'm going to use science, okay? Because it's valuable, it's important, right? And I think it's important to prove the existence of God. But I think sometimes you have to take a step back from the individual that you're talking about and you say, okay, what role does science play in your life, right? And what point are we allowed to break off of that? So this is a little side segue, okay? But now I don't want to get too deep into the concept of evolution, right? But evolution to me is a metabiological concept, not necessarily a scientific concept. So evolution is talking about natural selection begetting man from time, right? We have lots of science and lots of scientific papers around natural selection, around species changing in dealing with adverse effects, okay? When we start saying natural selection is the reason why a germ became a human. Now we're talking about metabiology, something outside of what we can test. We can't put that into a test tube and test it over and over and over and over again, right? We can test natural selection over and over and over again. We can't test evolution over and over and over again. So I was in a conversation with somebody one time, and they were like, "So do you argue that God should be in the science realm?" And I'm like, "I don't know, because it's metaphysics. Like it's outside the concept of science. I can't test for God. I can test evidence around God. I can test natural selection, for instance, evidence around the concept of evolution. I think if you want to keep evolution in the science classroom, then yeah, we should bring in metaphysics and start talking about God too, right? But ultimately, in my own profession and just kind of how I feel, I'm like, look, I think God belongs in a theology or a philosophy classroom, and I think evolution belongs over there too. It needs to be pulled out of the realm of science. I think science is more limited than people really give it credit for. That's just my own little soapbox. I'm known to get on those from time to time in this class. I apologize, but thoughts on that?
Isn't science supposed to be more like mathematics, concrete? There's a cause and effect, but yet, if I understand it correctly, philosophy's been spun into it to help justify evolution.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to say, is natural selection being where we can study finches that are stuck in a drought and their beaks change. We can repeat that data a lot, actually, with a lot of different species, down to the cellular level and clear up to the elephant level, right? That these species long-term evolve into an entire new species. We can't repeat that data. We actually can't test it. We can philosophically deduct it. But then if you're allowing something that we philosophically deducted, then why can't I bring something like God that I philosophically deducted into the classroom? It's a bit of a double standard from the atheists, is what I'm trying to say. Is they're trying to say when it comes to the metaphysics, outside of physics concept of God, that you can't bring that in the classroom because you can't test for it. Okay, fair enough. And evolution is new too. You can't test that either. I can test the concepts around it, but I can't test it. So, what do you want? Cake or you want to eat it too?
I think sometimes it's intimidating to talk to somebody who's got a scientific background like you, because most of us don't have a science background. And I've seen, you know, a little bit more, you know, you have to know a little bit of it so you can talk in their world if you want to talk to an atheist as a science major type of thing. And so then taking something like DNA, which is so unique to every person, every kind of species, and maybe talking from, you know, how did that happen? Can you explain to me how that happened? Isn't it where you can stretch your own DNA from to the moon and back or something like that?
Yeah, it's pretty long. I don't know the actual, I thought it was like wrap around the world 6 times or something like that. But yeah, it's really.
Each of our DNAs, and then how did that happen just by chance, you know? Yeah, so it can be intimidating to talk to somebody who's very scientific, unless you maybe don't live with it, I think.
I agree with you. I see that. I guess that was kind of my point, to try to bring this up a little bit. So how are you guys to not be intimidated by science as the end-all be-all answer to everything? And the individual that is coming at you with that scientific background doesn't truly believe it themselves either, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They'll pretend like they do. They'll put it on a facade, right? But the reality is they actually probably feel stronger. We'll talk about this on week 4, which will be in 7 weeks. But like, they feel stronger about their own moral code, to be honest with you. They feel really, really strong that rape is wrong, right? They probably feel stronger about that, especially if they have a little daughter, than they do actually truly about evolution and the science around it. And the reality is that they can't test that. You can't put that in a test tube and test it over and over again. It's not scientific. It's philosophy. It's the study of ethics, which is a philosophical concept, right? So that's my point, I'm not necessarily saying you have to be able to go toe-to-toe with the scientists. It's knock them back off the horse a little bit is what I'm trying to say. The reality is that they can't prove to you that science is the end all be all answer to everything. They're living in a fake world, and that's what they really think is the truth.
Well, reptilian DNA and mammal DNA is two totally different things.
Yeah.
You can't get mammal from a reptilian. It doesn't matter how much you want to put it in a test tube and test it, you're not going to get it. I mean, it's just like the possums that have been here for years and years and years. Their ears are getting shorter and their tails are getting shorter. Why is that? Because they've been freezing off. They weren't normally here. The opossum was not native to Michigan. It was a southern animal, but they have adapted to this our environment, and that's the kind of evolution that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Is the adaptation, natural adaptation.
Yep.
So you're not, so it's not real hard to really argue with them about
Right.
that. Say, okay, then make me a bird out of that
Well,
rattle.
I say, tell me when a specific kind of species has changed
Yeah.
and evolved from one kind of species to another kind. It's never happened, but species have evolved based on the environments that
Yeah.
they've grown into. But you haven't seen a possum turn into a horse.
Right.
Good point. I like it a lot.
In fact, they're killing horses, unfortunately, because their urine is really bad on the hay.
You would kill a
I'm
horse?
serious, no, on a possum.
possum.
Urine
Yeah,
Oh,
awesome.
yeah.
killing
Yeah.
horses.
You
Yeah.
find proves a little more
Yeah.
lies.
Yeah.
Anyways, sorry. Okay, so,
Come out of your burn.
let's move into a couple arguments. I have 3 arguments today. One of them I think you guys will really like. It's called the teleological argument. It's probably the one that's more popular in use. It kind of spins off of the whole DNA concept that you were talking about. It talks about complexity in the world. We love to use it within Christianity because we have scripture about it, right? We have scripture about how complex this world is. And so that'll be a fun one for you guys, okay? And we'll do it. I'm excited about it. I have another one in here that I always am hesitant of using, but I brought it forth, and I have some good evidence for it, and I assume I'm going to talk about it for a while. You guys might even glaze over a little bit at me. Feel free to ask me questions. I'm not bringing you this argument because I want you to for sure be able to repeat it right away the second you walk out of this door, but I want you to have it in your back pocket because it's extremely sound when it's broken down. And even if you were able to reference it in your head to be able to send somebody towards it, it's the same argument that William Lane Craig launches around this world. It's the same argument that Richard Dawkins refuses to deal with. It just ultimately is sound. It's strong. It utilizes science and it utilizes philosophy. Okay, and it's a relatively simple concept, but it can get kind of heady the deeper you think about it. Okay. So I'm only going to spend so much time on it. Don't glaze over on me too much, okay? Then we'll do the theological. Then we're going to do a third argument that's called the ontological. It's just a really fun philosophical thing. We won't spend much time on it. I've never been able to use it in the field. I tell you guys so that maybe you guys can memorize it, and one day someone in this room will come back to me and say, I've used the ontological argument and it worked. And it'll be fun, okay? What did you say?
What does it mean?
I'll show it to you. It's just fun, but it's probably less practical. So I put a little segue up at the top here, old earth versus new earth, right? I'm sure every Christian in this room has thought about the concept of is the earth 6,000 years old or is the earth 6.5 billion years old, okay? And I'm sure if I opened that floor, I would have a plethora of debating and some passion revolving around that. It's, I don't know, they printed them front and back up for you guys, yeah? So I understand that that topic comes with some heat or some personal investment. I think there are people from all across the spectrum in this room. There are some who have chosen to err more towards, well, science says this, so we can maybe move that into what Genesis is trying to say, that the earth is a little bit older. And then there's some that says, I refuse to give in to that. I'm not listening to that. I'm going to follow more some of the other schools of thought. For the purpose of this argument, it doesn't matter. Okay? We are trying to utilize their belief system, and that they believe in something like the Big Bang Theory for our purposes, to prove the existence of God. Okay? So the analogy kind of is, I understand if you don't believe in the Second Amendment, but if somebody's running through your school shooting and they drop the gun, you're going to pick up and use it. Okay? To defend yourself. Okay? So we're using their own argument kind of against them at this point in time. later. I put a little thing at the end of the time. If we have time, I will give you some information on both sides of the argument for new and old, or just for our own in-house personal fun debate. Okay? All right, good. Long cosmological argument. 3 points. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe had to have had a cause. We're going to work to try to prove that that cause was God. Okay? Well, first let's talk about the first 3 points. The first point's pretty easy. Not too many people have ever really debated this. Whatever begins to exist had a cause. The reason why you believe this to your very core is no one is afraid that a unicorn is just going to magically appear in this room for no apparent reason. You inherently, if for some reason a unicorn pops up right here, you would naturally deduct that something caused that. Something had to have made that happen. Okay? It's just a simple thought process in your own head. Everybody believes that if something began to exist, it was caused by something. If a child began to exist, it was caused by something. Right? It's a pretty simple concept. The next one is one where there's some hot debate. Okay? The universe began to exist. Okay? The first person who really kind of started talking about this was Aristotle way back in the day. Okay? And he thought the universe was eternal. And he said, Aristotle, he thought it was eternal. He thought eternal. Timeless. So the universe never began to exist. Okay? It always has, it always will be. That was what he originally thought about it. Okay? Maybe it is like a turtle, like that turtle world. Like what is the cartoon where the world's?
Ninja Turtle?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Anyways, eternal. Okay, so this is what Aristotle originally said. Okay, now there's a guy who's actually not Christian. Al-Ghazi came up with around 1,000 or so. He was not happy with that concept because he said if the universe never began to exist, then it actually wouldn't need God, and he believed in Allah. And so he developed an argument in opposition to that, and he said if we could ever prove that the universe began to exist, then we could prove that God exists. Okay? At the time, he didn't have enough science to really back up what he said. Thomas Aquinas came in behind him at 1200 and started doing the same thought process. Started saying, okay, I can really formulate this, and he started creating and moving around this cosmological argument. Okay? It really all started launching and taking off like crazy in around 1929. And that's when Hubble showed up. You guys have heard of Hubble's telescope before? Okay? This is when Big Bang Theory really started to kind of take off. Hubble came up with this concept. And then from Hubble in the 60s is when we really hit Big Bang Theory. Okay? And the church, instead of taking this and running with it and using it, they really dug their heels in against it and said, whoa, wait, this is saying here, this is way older than the Bible is really giving us credit for it. We're not going to deal with this conversation. And then the years to come, we're going to really kind of take this and spin it back against the atheists and say, well, wait a minute, if you're saying that everything banged into existence, what caused that? Right? So Hubble got in his telescope and he started looking, and he discovered the Doppler effect for stars. Does anybody know what the Doppler effect is? You know what the Doppler effect is, Pops?
Yeah, but I don't know that I can explain it.
So a Doppler effect is just sound wave or waves, light, sound, microwave, anything, have a different frequency depending on where they are in relation to you. So the best way you know the Doppler effect is if you're getting ready to step out on the street and you're getting ready to get hit by a car and they go across you, right? Sounded different here versus here versus here, right? That's a sound wave that has a Doppler effect. So Hubble got out his telescope and started studying the color of stars on a light spectrum. Red being up here, then yellow, blue, violet. Okay? And what he found is that the stars over years had a Doppler effect in the sense they started bending towards red, meaning they were getting further away from us. If they bent towards blue, it would look like they were actually getting closer to us. And he developed the theory that the universe is expanding. Okay? So that's reason one why we think that the universe began to exist and it's not eternal. Because it's expanding. Because of Hubble. Okay? Everybody's okay? We only have a couple of delays over the list until we're good so far. Okay, good. Good. The second reason is the second law of thermodynamics. Anybody know what the second law of thermodynamics is? You guys are going right back to high school physics. You're loving me. I can see
Everything
it.
has a cause, or everything has a beginning.
No, that's That's Einstein's theory of relativity, isn't it? Yes. So, second law of thermodynamics, when I was a kid, I was 4, 3, whatever, my parents were tired of dealing with me because I was really hyper, so they put me in the bathtub. And they turned the bathtub on, okay? It was a nice warm bath. And I'd play for hours, right? I was like my grandma, I was so excited. I'd have my little wrinkly fingers and stuff like that. And I would yell after about an hour and a half, "Mom, my water's cold!" And she'd come and she'd turn on the hot water. She wouldn't turn on warm water, she'd turn on scalding hot water. Because what happens to that water? Was I afraid that if I stepped over here, scalding hot water, and then I have an ice cube on the right side? All of the water molecules will naturally disperse to an even level of equilibrium, right? That's what happens as a second law of thermodynamics. Likewise, none of us are afraid that we're going to run into a pocket in this room that there's no oxygen. The oxygen level in this room is 20%. There are 20% oxygen molecules evenly dispersed throughout this room of oxygen. And if we started pumping oxygen in this tube in here, it would disperse itself evenly until it landed to a state of equilibrium. That's the second law of thermodynamics. Okay? Thought experiment. If the universe, which we know has to follow the second law of thermodynamics, was eternal, would it still be expanding? It would be in a direct rest of where it's at. There would be no more movement. There would be no more energy movement. It would be in what we would call a heat death, where we have landed a perfect distance away that naturally would occur from the sun, and there would be no life at all. Because all of the molecules in this entire universe would have come to a perfect steady state and no longer be moving. See what I'm saying? D, little d. Right though? So 2 reasons why you understand the universe to have began to exist. We don't want to argue about whether it was 6.5 billion years ago or 6,000 years ago. We really don't care for the purpose of our argument, okay? Point is it began, right? And it began, and the 2 reasons why we know is because Hubble and the Doppler effect, and because of the second law of thermodynamics. 2 very scientific things that they learned in their high school science class that they should have a pretty good grasp on if you're such an almighty knowing atheist, right? Okay? That was just a little bit of a... Don't do that snarky thing. Remember me talking about having a good heart? Don't sound like that. Just say it, okay? So, I got that quote from Richard Slegel. He said, in some way, we really have to kind of believe that this universe must have at least been wound up somehow or some way. It had a cause. Okay? So then the last part, the universe had a cause, is where we really got our work cut out for us, because now we have to deduct, okay, we had this cause, and they kind of probably believe that anyways, because they probably believe it's something like the Big Bang Theory. Now we have to deduct that that cause is God, and not something else. First question they're going to ask, if you say that the cause was God, they're going to be like, well, then what caused God? That's a common hit-fire. And it's easy. You just say, refer to your first statement. Whatever began to exist has a cause. My God never began to exist. He's eternal. No beginning, no end. Okay? So my argument is talking about things that begin to exist. Okay? Furthermore, things that we need to deduct 2 things about this cause of the universe. 1, it needs to be timeless, because then it just passes the bill. If it's something else that is also not eternal, something else that had a beginning to exist, then all it did was pass the bill to the next thing. So if we said it was another universe that began this universe, then the question begs, well, what started that universe? Right? And we know that that universe also isn't eternal, because then second law of thermodynamics, it would be in a heat death. So we come up with this situation where it kind of can't be materialistic. If it is material, and it's eternal, then it's going to be in a heat death. So it has to be eternal, and by the philosophy that we've been deducting, it has to be not material. We know 2 things in this universe that we can think of that are eternal and not material. One is numbers, and the other is the mind.
Say that again.
It's a deep philosophical thing, okay?
Say it again.
There's 2 things that we know of from our experience that are actually eternal, they never had a beginning or an end, and they're not material. And one is a number, which we know can't create a universe, and the other is a mind, which we can't. So, another way kind of around this argument, if you look at my back part of this, I think I put it on the back. Here. So here's a thought experiment. If we were to try to say that frozen water, this is just a thought experiment, but if a universe of frozen water was going to create another universe, then it would be a universe of frozen water. Only a conscious mind could create a universe that is in opposition of what it is. So an eternal universe, something that never began or exists, consciously chose to create something opposite of its nature, something that was in fact timed, something that had a timeline. See what I'm saying? You have to ruminate on this one for a while. Let me put some scripture to it. Let's look at Exodus, okay? And this is Exodus 3, verses 13 through 15, and that's on this back page, okay? In Exodus, this is when Moses runs into the burning bush. I think most of us have probably heard this concept before, right? So Moses says, he runs into the burning bush, and he runs kind of face to face with God, okay? And let's read what happens. God tells him all these things that he needs to go do. You have to go back into Egypt, you have to release my people, and Moses is a little bit nervous about this concept, right? He's kind of like, first thing he's like, well, hey, I can't really talk very well, I got a stutter, what do you think about that? And he's like, don't worry about that, I'll send your brother Aaron with you. And then he's like, well, who do I even tell? Who sent me at this point in time? And this is kind of the passions that we get at here, okay? Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. And God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all the generations. Does anybody know what the Hebrew translation of I am who I am is?
Is it Yahweh?
It's Yahweh. Very good. So that's the Jewish, probably the number one name that the Jewish culture calls God is Yahweh. Y-E-E-T-A-H.
W-A-H.
W-A-H? W-A-H? Okay. I am who I am. So if you break that down, the first part of I am, scholars believe, is talking to his eternal nature. Meaning I never was, like I wasn't, I used to be, and I'm not a will be, I am. I'm eternal, I'm forever. And then the second part of that is talking about his consciousness and his personality. Two requirements for the beginning of a universe. It has to be eternal, and it's got to be a mind. I won't dwell on it too long. It's a really sound argument that utilizes a lot of science kind of the direction. Like I said, I don't want you guys to necessarily have to go out this door and be ready to like take this to the front lines and deal with it. It's just a pretty sound classical argument used today. Thoughts on it?
So interesting about the name I am. So you have the name Zach because your mother gave you that name.
Right.
Because I have to take the heat for your sister's name. So who gave God his name?
None, because he never began.
That's right.
Right?
That's why he is I am.
Yep.
Because there was nobody to name him. So that leads towards the eternal argument.
It's kind of a deep argument, I understand. But it's very sound. It's something for you to ruminate on, think about, chew around for a little bit. And it does have some good science behind it. So if nothing else from this, you can feel confident that when someone says science disproves God, you can say, au contraire. I can point you in the direction of some places that actually science proves the existence of God. And then from there, all you gotta do is be able to look it up, right? Okay, everyone stand up. Stretch. Yep, everyone stretch. You guys all survived the Coulomb cosmological argument. You're okay. We should get you guys t-shirts like those race teachers. It's like, I survived. Yeah. Smith's Coulomb cosmological argument. Squeezy. Come here. Will you draw 60 zeros across the board? Thank you. The next argument we're going to go to is the teleological argument, okay? And this is an argument talking about the complexity of our universe and what we get to see, and arguing for the idea of what they would call an intelligent designer, okay? It's probably more popular within the Christian sect and group because it feels a little more real to us than kind of the deeper philosophical Coulomb cosmological argument, okay? But I think it does have more rebuttals from those who you'll be dealing with as well, right? Richard Dawkins, when dealing with the Coulomb cosmological argument, literally says, I have no response to that argument. But I just think that if you put God in there, it doesn't count. That's basically the way he defends that argument, okay? So, the teleological argument, when you're talking about the complexity of nature, I'll bet you $100 you're eventually going to, how you doing?
He lost count.
Are you good? Yeah. Okay, now I need you to use the green and go the rest of the way to 123. So, you're about guaranteed to end up in an argument about evolution, right? If you're going to start talking about the complexity of biology and the universe, you're eventually going to end up dealing with evolution, okay? Which is okay, it's not wrong. You eventually can work yourself up to being able to defend against that and talk around that. The Coulomb cosmological argument, there's very few people who can handle and deal with that argument in the atheistic world, okay? This one, you'll find some toe-to-toes, okay? But it's a good argument. I got some scripture about it first I want to read. Let's go to Psalms 19, 1 and 2. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day it pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun. And past generations, thanks Josh. In past generations he allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways. This is Acts 16 through 18, by the way. In past generations he allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways. Yet he did not leave himself without witness. For he did good by giving you rains from the heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness. Even with these words it scarcely restrained the people from offering sacrifice to him. So, this is a little bit what I was talking to you guys about last week, is often we see the complexity of nature and instantly our heart leaps towards God. We can see these things throughout life, like the trees and the animals and the galaxies and the stars, and be awestruck at his creativity, right? I once heard a quote that there actually is no person on earth who is creative. They're movers, right? Karen's beautiful with music. She can move notes. She never actually ever created a single one. God did that. A painter, right, can manipulate colors, but has never actually created a color. It's an interesting concept, right? So when you reflect that on God and the fact that he's the one who created all of that, it really kind of broadens our heart towards him and kind of awestruck, right? This is what the theological argument is trying to get at, okay? Two different concepts, two different ways to go about it. One, you can go about it from the physics aspect, astrology, and the universe, or you can go at it from the biological aspect, okay? The physics concept is a little bit of an easier cop-out because you don't have to deal with the evolutionists arguing about that with you. Richard Dawkins is quoted as saying, in response to the teleological argument, we still have yet to have an equivalent to evolution to answer to the physical aspects of that, and I have high hopes for my astrology partners to eventually be able to do that. Truth be told, within the physics realm and the astrology realm, we don't really have an answer for why on earth our universe is so complex, other than an intelligent designer. So, here's some numbers, and I can get you the papers close to them where you can look them up yourself if you really want. The probability that the universe came to exist by random chance explosion from the Big Bang is these first 60 numbers. 1 over that many zeros. That's basically like saying 0 point that many zeros, 1%. That's the probability that, boom, random chance, Big Bang, we ended up with our solar system. Our solar system. I'm not talking about our universe, our solar system. When you add the universe in there, you end up with this many more zeros, 123. This is where, if anybody's heard of the work of the apologist Frank Turek, this is where he gets his concept, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist.
You don't have enough what?
Faith to be an atheist. This is what he's utilizing, this stuff like this. He's saying, look at how improbable it is that the universe came to being without any help. I personally would like to put a little more stock in something than that, right? If you were going to the casino, would anybody lay any money on this? Would anybody lay their life down for this concept? Because that's ultimately what we're talking about, right? The last little number kind of that's on your guys' paper is that if gravity is off by 10 to the 100th. So basically, if gravity is off by a point that much, the universe couldn't exist. Planets would either condense in and explode, or planets would fall apart. They wouldn't be able to, if the concept of gravity was
Would
on that.
spin off the axles, wouldn't it?
Yeah, everything would either not hold together, or they would end too much. There would be no availability for matter to expand into planets and actually exist as they exist.
And that's because we're perfectly situated, right where we are in the universe, right? Gravity.
Yep.
So if we were anywhere else in the universe, we wouldn't have this perfect gravity.
And those things are all developed from Einstein's theory of relativity, right? And he's the one who really kind of set this all in motion when he started developing the concept of gravity. Okay? Now, probably a funner one is to kind of go down the route of biology. Okay? So William Paley, has anybody ever heard of the watchmaker's argument? It's a common one. William Paley said this back in the 1800s. He said, if one were to walk through the woods and stumble upon a rock, hit a rock, he goes, it would be easy for that individual to deduct from that rock that it was there by happened random chance. It would be easy to think that the weather or what have you could create or cause that rock to be there. He said, now, if one were to be walking through the woods and trip on a watch, even if one has never seen a watch before in their entire life and has no idea what it is, as soon as someone began to examine that, pull it apart, look at the 10 different little gears in there, the little tiny springs, the fact that it ticks with a concise purpose and movement, they would naturally deduct that this was made by a conscious mind. So when looking at things that have a high amount of complexity involved in them, it's natural for us to deduce that an intelligent design is behind it. Proponents against this, like Richard Dawkins, would say, well, you're simply not considering that biological species are different, but they have zero evidence to assume that biological species are any different than a mechanical thing. So I got a personal story for you guys. When I was in undergrad, I had to take an evolution class. And by I had to take it, it kind of killed like 3 birds with 1 stone for requirements for me to graduate. So it was like take 3 different classes or take Evolution 202 and listen to them talk at me for a couple of months and get a B and move on about my life, right? And so I took it. And it was not a summer course, but it was like a grouped up course, so I only had to go like once a week for like 3 hours for the semester. And I just went and dotted my I's and crossed my T's and did what I was supposed to do. And there was this gentleman in this class who was in his probably mid-40s, which is a little awkward in a class full of like 19, 20-year-olds, right? but it was an off-campus site, so he was just probably trying to get a degree for a career or something like that. This man went through 3/4 of the semester before he finally snapped. He would do like little small snippets, you know, like he would just occasionally just be like, no, I don't understand that. And he would challenge the professor a little bit and kind of try to throw it for a little bit. Finally, this guy, I'll never forget him so long as I life. He had on bibbed overalls and he had a beard and it was starting to whiten up in it and stuff like that. And he's like, I'm done. I'm just done with this. And he just took over this woman's class and I was like, oh, this guy snapped. And he's like, this is your theory. A tornado went through a junkyard and it made an airplane. He's like, and if that's not absurd enough, it didn't break the airplane down. It made an airport after the airplane. He's like, and then this tornado by random chance made a whole city. And he left. I was like, I'm going to hang on to that. I'm going to use that for the rest of my life. I like that concept.
What did she say, everyone?
She just silence. She just sat there in silence. And she was like, again, that's not talking about biological species, that's talking about mechanical things. And she just tried to move on and stuff, and everyone was just sitting there like, what just happened? Who knows? So, but that he was basically quoting William Paley's argument, the watchmaker argument, okay? That things of high complexity naturally deduce philosophically in our mind that this requires a designer. Okay?
Well, nothing's gone from simple to complex.
Right. So, this is where you end up down a conversation of evolution versus natural selection, right? And I put a couple of examples here, like I put two just random animals. I didn't give you the actual examples, so if you want to write things down, you will. But everyone talks about Darwin's finches. Has everybody heard about Darwin's finches? This is what everyone quotes. You know those finches are actually back to their original stat that they were. So back when they studied the Darwin's finches in the 90s, the Galapagos Islands, okay? They did find that there was a drought, and they found that there was 2 different seed sizes, and they found that their beaks changed. If you went back to that island today, back in 2007 or 2010, I can't remember when they came out with the next study, same people, went back, 1 finch again. Same size beak. So we have evolution, or we have perfect evidence of natural selection. We have perfect evidence that species can adapt to a given change over time. If you put them into extreme pressure, they will change. We would argue that that's a God-given talent, right? But we don't have any evidence that they morphed into new or the old species. Furthermore, Darwin, it can be quoted out of his book, Origin of Species, that the entire theory of macroevolution, that humanity came from bacteria, right? The entire theory of macroevolution will stand and fall on the fossil record. Okay? And I don't think we've come very far. Now let me give you a mini soapbox. Everybody has a skeptic dial, right? Okay? Everybody in this room has a skeptic dial. The atheist also has a skeptic dial. When you start quoting quotes from the Bible, guess what happens to their skeptic dial? They start dialing it up really high. They're pretty skeptical of anything that would come from the Bible, right? I have a skeptic dial when it comes to things in and around evolution, right? We all have it. It's just a natural human reaction. You're going to defend things. If somebody were to tell me that my wife is having an affair, I'm going to have a skeptic dial. Like, no, not, right? It's just a natural human reaction. So we gotta be careful to try to be as diligent about that as we can. I try to be as honest as I can in assessing the stuff. And I personally find that you do your own research. There's a lot of holes in the fossil record in developing the existence of humanity from bacteria stuff. Okay? And they can talk about a fossil record with various levels of monkeys, but you start getting much beyond that, and we have a really hard time figuring out what to deduct in the next thing. So the major holes to really truly think about, one is the giraffe. We have a huge problem answering where the giraffe came from. Because here's the thing, we have no middle species for the giraffe. We have nothing that's kind of a pseudo-giraffe, like, hey, that's a baby giraffe. It doesn't really exist. We either have zebra length neck, or we have giraffe like necks. Like, where was our middle interim species? And we don't really have a fossil record to follow that. Furthermore, the biological concepts in the giraffe is pretty interesting. The giraffe has a 2-foot heart. That's kind of crazy. It's like this big. Okay? And it's because when you have to get blood 13 stories high, you have to pump it as fast as you can. Okay? So 13 feet, not stories, I'm being exaggerated. Okay? But it takes a lot of pressure to pump heart blood that high up. Okay? What happens when the head goes down to get a drink and now gravity is working with that heart? It would get an aneurysm actually. It would explode that giraffe's brain. So the giraffe is the only species that we know of. Last I checked, this was back in 2013 when I did this research, but it's the only species we know of that actually has valves inside their arteries instead of inside their veins. So we all have valves in our veins because by then the blood flow is kind of slowing down a little bit. It's lost some of its inertia from the initial heart boom, right? And so those valves kind of stop. It's kind of like a don't return back valve, right? You go and then it like starts to slosh back and there's a valve there, right? The giraffe has them in their artery, so that whenever they bend over, they don't end up with an aneurysm the second that they do it. Giraffes are also seen eating grass about 80% of the time off the ground. So we don't really know why we have something that naturally selected to have a 13-foot tall neck. We have no fossil record definitive. Another hole in the fossil record, last I did this research, was the whale and the mammal, like the dolphin, the whale, the manatee. They are way closer cousins to the elephant and to the cow than they ever will be to fish. There is so much genomic difference between them and a shark or a fish that we have zero way to deduct it. So actually the only way we can make sense that a whale came to be, which by the way has a gestation period of like 415 some days or something. It's long, it's forever long. Okay, so if we're talking about natural selection in generation upon generation upon generation, we're slowly creating a lot of time with the concept of a whale, by the way. But nonetheless, we have to deduce actually that the fish came onto land, developed into a mammal from a reptile, and then from the mammal actually went back into the water. We have a closer genomic connection via DNA that way than we actually do from fish to whale. We can't make that connection. So we've just increased things by hundreds of thousands of years, if not longer, because we have to go from then from here to there. Just
So how do the evolutionists explain that?
I know that's sort of why. I told you though in the beginning of this class, I kind of dodge the evolution debate a lot of times, right?
You kind of want
Dodge it. I just don't deal with it. The reality of it is the theory itself is so stinking complex. I don't think I think actually, there is a group of people called theistic evolutionists, by the way. People who think that possibly Genesis talks more in an evolutionary type concept. I think it has, on my own personal opinion, I think it has its own theological flaws and holes that it really kind of doesn't answer. But nonetheless, it's such a complex theory. It doesn't do anything to confirm or deny the existence of my God. Like the probability is this. So if you want to believe in it, I'm going to say that's evidence for an intelligent designer. It's not evidence for something happening from nothing. And then it gets me closer to that worldview debate, right? And if they really want to force you in it, you can find holes in evolution, kind of like I did, and you can do research on it and figure it out for sure, right? Michael Behe is a really good one. B-E-H-E. He does a lot of micro-level stuff, arguing against the existence of evolution. Okay, and he deals with a lot of cells and things of that nature, and mice and stuff like that. Okay, he's a pretty good forefront against evolution. I like him. He's a good guy. Actually, I've never met him. He may be a good guy, but I think he's okay. In the first class, if you remember on my I told you guys some of my resources, right? I said I use William Lane Craig's Reasonable Faith, and I use Wayne Grudem's Systematic Theology, and then the next thing below that was a website called Apologetics 315. That website is literally, the guy's made his entire living off of just bringing in apologists from all different aspects of the apologetical facet. So if you want an apologist that knows how to argue against Muslims, for instance, you go to his website, you click on the link, and he will give you 10 of them. and their podcasts. Apologetics 315. He gets 315 from 1 Peter 3:15. Be prepared to give a hope for the reason that, to give a reason for the hope that is within you, right? So that is his website. You won't find any like raw information on there. Sometimes he does a little terminology stuff or whatever, but he literally is just a data collection. It's just a source collection site, and you'll find anything. If you have a passion against evolution, he'll give you link after link after link after link after link, right? If you are like, I didn't understand a third of that cosmological argument, but I feel like now, 2 years later, I'm all of a sudden going to need it, go to that site. He'll get you in that direction. So, okay? All right, here's the last one. It's kind of, where are we at? I've just been talking. Okay, last argument, ontological argument. It's kind of it's very philosophical and heady, but it's just fun, so we're just going to do it, okay? It came back, clear back in 1033 by Anselm. He's the one who created this. I don't know who he is. That's just how you say his name, I think. Okay? And here's what it says. God is the greatest conceivable being. If you're thinking of a being that's not the greatest conceivable being, then that's not God. Okay? By definition, God is the greatest conceivable being in our own minds. Right? It is greater to exist than not to exist. Therefore, God exists. I love it. I was waiting to get your eyebrows. Every once in a while, I'll say something to Kel, and she'll just give me this, like, what'd you say? So, let's argue about that. Let's talk about the concept of greater to exist than to not exist, right? A simple analogy is a painter, okay? A painting, for instance. It is greater for a painting to exist than not to exist. If you imagine an artist thinking of a painting, if the artist didn't paint the painting versus if he painted it. Now, 2 copies of it. There's one in his mind, and there's one that's actually physically manifested in front of you. That's a greater existence than if it never was painted at all, okay? So God is the greatest conceivable being. I don't know, this is fun.
Those are some paintings that probably shouldn't exist.
Well, maybe. Maybe. You might be right. But God is the greatest conceivable being. It is greater to exist than not to exist. Therefore, God exists. I've never been able to use it in the field. If somebody could do it for me one day, it would be great. I'd love it. Like even, I don't know, let's assume everybody goes out and about their ways and 15 years from now, we're still not talking. Find my email or text me or something and say, yo, I used an ontological argument the other day, and the dude didn't know what to say. It'd be awesome.
Well, what's the argument against
I
that?
don't know. I haven't found one.
I mean, it's not greater to not exist, because
I think that's where people start.
if you not exist, then
Yeah, I think that's where people try to start to say, because I don't feel like you would have much merit arguing that God is the greatest conceivable being. So I think people try to start saying, well, it's not necessarily the greatest thing to exist. Maybe it's greater to not exist. And then, you know, down that little hill of argument kind of. So
there is no argument there.
I think so too, but the way that I've always wanted to use this, because I've never had somebody throw this cliche thing at me yet, and I guess this is where I've always had this running in my pockets. I ran into is you run into people who say that can God ever create a stone that is so big he can't throw, right? Old school philosophical thing. And I've never actually had somebody like personally bring that to me before. And I want to just be like, no, that's a contradiction. My God's not a God of contradictions. But I got a philosophical one for you, and like snap this one back out and see what kind of response I can get out of it. See if I can get a scream or not. We got enough time. I can do one more philosophical one for you guys. And then we'll do, I'm winging this one. This one's not even on the pages, okay? This is extra credit. And then afterwards, we'll do a little bit on the age of the earth, okay? And then we'll move on. And you guys can go home. Despite the time. I'm not going to keep you here until 8:30 no matter what. Anybody ever heard of Blaise Pascal?
Yep.
Who's he? Huh? Pascal?
Pascal?
Pascal, yeah. You know who he is?
No, I know the name.
You know the name? Pascal is the world's first modern man. He invented the calculator. He was in France, right? And his dad was a census guy. You know what your job was if you were a census guy? Counting. What did you count most of the time?
Numbers.
Huh?
Numbers.
Numbers? What? Well, numbers of what? People, exactly. And to the population every year, right? And just like my son has to get in the car with me to go do cabins and stuff like that, eventually he probably is just going to be like, Dad, I don't want to go see another cow for the rest of my life. I'm fine. Blaze was in this same predicament. Every year he had to take census, right? His dad had to take census. Well, guess what you are if you're a teenager in your dad's house and your dad's got to take census? You're a human calculator. You're going to be like, son, take these papers over here, count them up. I want to figure out how many people live in this quadrant of the city. And he got tired of it. He said, I'm not doing this anymore. This is stupid. And he invented the calculator. Okay? So, brainiac. He invented it by the time he was the age, because he died at the age of 39. So he invented it in his late 20s.
His first name Lewis?
Blaze.
Blaze.
Blaze, B-L-A-I-S-E.
Louis Pascal, that's something that,
Really? I don't know Louis Pascal. But anyways, this,
doesn't. That's Pat, no, I'm talking about Pascal. Doesn't mean what.
okay, so this is his, so that's his background. I just like nerding out about it because again, it's one of my soapboxes where I get to say, you know, science and a religious man are not necessarily separate of each other, right? Here's actually the man who invented everything that you rely on. Everyone has a smartphone in your pocket. And if it were not for that godly man, you would not have a smartphone in your pocket, right? But here's was his argument, because he was a mathematician, right? They say he is one of the few men who could actually go to the casino and take all of the casino's money, because he was that much of a numbers brainiac, okay? So here's his argument. You have 4 situations that you can do in your life, okay? You're going to pretend that your life is a set of chips. You have 80 years, and each one's $1, right? And you're going to pretend that the table, the game that you're playing, is life itself, and you're going to gamble on the existence of God. Because you have four options when you go here, okay? Because option 1, you go in and you put all $80, and you bet it on the existence of God, and you're right, and you earn an eternity. So to go with the analogy, you bet $80 at blackjack, and you win an infinite amount of money. Probably the best option. Option 2, you retain, or you bet all of your $80, all of your 80 years of life on God, and you're wrong, then you lose those 80 years. Option 3, you go in and you keep your $80, and you're right, and you gained $80. You kept it in your pocket. This is the quote from Paul, who says, if the resurrection is not true, then eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. Right? So retain your 80 years. Don't devote it wasting all that time going to listen to Darren on Sundays, right? Like, have some good drinks, smoke some good cigars, wake up hungover. Here's your 80 years over here. You can do them however you want to do it, right? Last option, you retain your 80 years, and you're wrong, and you earn an eternity in hell. So really, all you have to gain is either 80 years or an infinite amount of years. If you had all of the money of your entire life to bet on this bet, what would you really do with it? The only natural, mathematically sound decision to ever make is to take the bet. Because what you have to gain at taking the bet far outweighs anything else. It's kind of a philosophical, mathematical model. I actually used that one once. I used it with an agnostic, a guy who said, I refuse to make any decision. And so it took me 3 full nights of hanging out, having 1 or 2 beers and really arguing about God's existence, to where I finally convinced him that he was the man who actually was just walking up, dropping his $80 on the table and walking away. I'm like, for the love man, at least be the man who spends the 80 years doing what you want to do with it. Like, be the atheist who says he doesn't exist and I'm going to live my life how I want to live. I'm like, I want you to be the guy who spends your 80 years invested in God, and you go this way, right? And you get your eternity. But all you're doing is setting up, dropping your chips on the table, and guaranteeing yourself to either lose $80 or to lose an infinite amount of money. You see what I did with that kind of thing? He looked at me square in the face and he said, checkmate. He So by that argument, I should worship your God. So, but I don't want to. Do you have any answers for that? I was wondering, I learned a lot about the concept we talked last week about, it's not my job to make a believer, it's my job to teach believers, and about God working on people's hearts, right? And I can only kind of go so far in the midst of a conversation. So his name was Raf, R-A-F. He was smarter than I was by my inside. I learned so much just debating with that guy. I would walk out with 3 more challenges than I ever thought. And I was so impressed with the fact that he just wanted to engage intellectually. There's very few people that you'll run into that. Most of them are more emotionally tied to it than he was. And he truly, the existence of God was an intellectual issue for him. It was not an emotional issue. So he said, until the very end, when I broke down that barrier, and then it turned out it was a little more emotional than he was willing to give me credit for. So. Thoughts on Pascal's wager? That's how it's named.
Bernie Smith.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay, so we did cosmological argument, we did teleological argument, we did ontological argument, and we did Pascal's wager. So those are some pretty good arguments for the existence of God. Keep in mind, those aren't probably going to help you prove Jesus. It's just going to prove God, right? The Muslim can use most of those exact same arguments, if not all of them. The Jew can as well. Even a lot of Hindus and people of different faiths as well can utilize those things. So that's why it's key to kind of learn the worldview of who you're talking to and what's going on before you really kind of progress further into the conversation. All right, let's talk a little bit about old earth and new earth. Okay? First bit of scripture I want to read before we get talking about this, just because this one does come with so much heat, is 1 Peter 3:8. It says, finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. It's kind of my conviction towards you that as we get to talking about whether or not this world is 6,000 years old or 6.5 billion years old, let's be humble amongst each other, okay? And let's respect each other's kind of viewpoints and deals. I've been in this conversation with other Christians, and sometimes we can get some heat to it, okay? It's kind of like talking about worship. Sometimes they call it the carpet, right? You can get some heat with that, okay? All right. Old earthers tend to believe that the earth is anywhere between 6.5 to 4.5 billion years old, okay? Hugh Ross is probably one of the forefronts on this, okay? So if you're really looking for some information from somebody who does a very good job of this, he's one of them. His website is called reasontobelieve.com. Highly recommend you go check him out if you're interested in kind of this perspective, okay? And probably whichever perspective you are interested in, look at the other perspective too, right? Like I said, careful what your skeptical dial is doing, okay? Careful what you're willing to try to believe and not believe. Look at things from both sides of it, okay? He has some pretty good arguments. He talks about Genesis 2:4, where he talks about basically, here's what this passage says. It says, these are the generations, kind of time frames, of the heavens and of the earth that they were created, in that day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. The word day right there is yom. You can actually go to the internet and you can watch Ken Ham, who I'll quote later for New Earth stuff, and Hugh Ross argue about the word yom for an hour and 45 minutes. It's riveting. But the word yom is the Hebrew word for day utilized throughout Genesis. Okay? And that kind of, as you can figure out, is where everybody hangs their hat on, is how long is this day mentioned, or how long is it in Genesis, right? Is it more than a 24-hour day, or is it however many hundreds of thousands of years, right? He will quote in Job 20, verses 28, the possessions of his house will be carried away, dragged off in the day of God's wrath. The same word yom is utilized in that passage, and we learn from later on in Revelations that it's a little longer than a day that all of the plagues come and all of God's wrath comes, right? Closer to, like, you have the tribulation time of 1,000 years, and you get into Revelations, which is not my forte. You can talk to the man back there if you want to talk about some Revelations, but those are some of the quotes that they utilize some of the arguments, okay, is that the actual 24-hour concept of day did not appear until really kind of a modern time period, okay? When we developed the clock is when we started thinking 24 hours is a day. It used to be the rise of the sun and set of the sun. That's what the day is. That is why you actually see the New Earth proponents try to say, it says right there in Genesis, it says, and then there was evening, and then there was a morning, the next day, right? But basically the way that the old earther tries to argue about it is the concept of 24 hours being a day is a modern concept. You're reading that into the Old Testament. That's not a reality. Furthermore, the sun isn't even made until day 4. So when the sun shows up in day 4, how is it that you're saying day 1, 2, and 3 was 24 hours? The sun wasn't even revolving around at that point in time for those first 4 days. So what gives us any kind of an inclination to say that it was 24 hours? It's kind of an older perspective of things. Okay? Probably another old earth argument is in Genesis 2:19. It says, now out of the ground the Lord God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens and brought them to the man and see what he could call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was his name. Their argument is God was almighty and all-powerful, and yes, God could have done all these things in 24 hours. Adam is not God. So you try to take a fraction of the animals in the world and start naming them. See if you can pull it off in 24 hours. So their argument is if it actually truly was a 24-hour time period in day 6 that he named all of those animals before God rested, then he wasn't going to be able to. Either one, you're going to tell me that not all those animals were created yet, and now you're down to stick to that slippery slope level. Did some of the animals get created elsewhere? Did some of the animals evolve? I don't use the word evolve around you because you're going to get a little huffy. That's kind of an older argument. Is how did Adam name all these things within 24 hours? Okay? Let's do a couple New Earth arguments and then I can open up the floor, okay? So New Earthers tend to believe that the Earth is anywhere between 10 to 20,000 years. Ken Ham is a big proponent of this, okay? He does the ministry called Answers in Genesis. He actually has the Creation Museum down in Kentucky, I believe it is. It's pretty neat. I think Ken Ham, this is my own soapbox about Ken Ham. Ken Ham can be a little guilty of placing a huge amount of emphasis on creationism, like on a young earth creationism, that he's willing to throw, I believe, other brothers and sisters of Christ under the bus for their own belief system. Okay? But you can decide that for your own kind of philosophical, whatever you choose. Okay? But I do think the man has some pretty good answers to some tough questions. And so I tend to still reference him because him and some of his workers have answered a lot of good questions. Namely around, he does some pretty good stuff dealing with the dinosaurs and the flood. And he has some pretty good articles around fish fossils being found in mountains up in the Himalayas. And I don't read super in depth in some of this stuff, but he has some pretty good arguments over there for New Earth if that's something that you're more looking for evidence for. And you're like, probably one of the two biggest philosophical vendettas behind the New Earth is, one, they want to say, first of all, that there's a big theological reason for the earth being created in 7 days. And that's created over in Exodus 20:11. It says, when God talks about the Sabbath, he says, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on that seventh. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So the New Earther would argue, you're going to try to stretch those days out for longer than the 24-hour time period, and you're going to break down the whole theological idea of the Sabbath. And when God gave a reason why I am creating the Sabbath, he said, in 6 days I created this world. Right? Now I use the word yom, which is where you end up in another hour and 45-minute debate over yom. But nonetheless, that's I think a pretty decent young earth argument. And it's something that an old earther really has to wrestle with and deal with is, I'm going to stretch out the word yom in these instances, then why was God pretty cut and dry and clear that on the seventh day you need rest? Okay?
But in either one of those arguments, you still do not know how long God's day is.
Well, agreed. And that's...
In both arguments, neither one of them proves that an actual day or a yom is 24 hours as we know it.
Well, in Exodus 20, he sets up this law on the Sabbath. And then later on in Exodus, he definitely punishes people for not taking the 24-hour notice day of the Sabbath seriously. Right? So when they go out and they collect, what was this? I'll have to look at the scripture.
No, I understand that,
See what I'm saying?
but see, that's a day to them, right? That is a day to the people in Exodus, is a 24 hours, just like a day to us is 24 hours. But a day to God, I'm not disputing it one bit that there were 7 days to God. It took him 7 of his days, or six of his days, and he rested on his 7th day. So how long is that day? Is it 1 second to us?
Right.
Is it 5,000 years to us? We don't know. And neither one of those arguments proves it either way.
Well, I think that the older Earther definitely says that. I think the newer Earther would say, well, then why does it say in Genesis 1:5, and there was evening and then there was a morning the first day?
Again, is that God's evening and God's morning? I think that's his evening. I think that's exclusive to him. I think the first part of Genesis is exclusive to God.
He was creating.
That's right. He's painting. But he's not painting, he is making the colors.
Right.
So you used that reference earlier.
Yeah.
You can blend colors to make the spectrum, right? But everything still comes back to those 5 basic colors. And we cannot make those again because God made them himself.
Right.
So I think that's in his realm. Those first verses in Genesis are totally specific to him and only him. This is his day, and he did everything he did in day 1, which was one of his days, and we have no way to know how long that day is.
Other thoughts?
I hear your thought, but then I want to, how do you then apply that to the example of the manna? We see how God instructs the Israelites as they were leaving, right? Is that how that worked? I don't remember. And he provided manna for them to eat, but he told them to collect on the 6th day enough for the 7th day, correct?
Yeah.
And therefore, how do you transition? I don't disagree with your argument.
I think
But
that,
then how can you have your cake and eat it too?
because I think the transition is the creation of man. I think at the point where man is created, then at that point, a day that we would know would be a day, because a day to Adam is the same as a day to me. That's how it works in my mind. I don't know if that's right, but that's how it works in my mind. A day to God is not the same as a day to me. That explains to me the creation, the time of the creation.
Can I piggyback off yours?
Sure.
Like the word therefore in there. So I'm kind of going with you with God's days are different than our days. And somebody says, therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So just like Jesus said, therefore take this bread in remembrance of me. So it's a symbolism, like God's years can be thousands, but then for us, he wants our week to be a symbol of his. Even though his was 1,000 was a day here, 1,000 was a day here, but for us, we can't do that because we're not on the earth for 1,000, so our week is a symbol of God's.
To replica.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I read the therefore as.
I feel like he created the day, like what you're saying, to suit our life. That he's made us. He can do whatever he wants. But he had to set us up something because it's like you said, we're not here for 1,000 years or whatever. So he made us have, okay, this is how you're going to be set up.
Well, and he also created us knowing like we needed to sleep, we needed to eat to survive. So you can't make our day 1,000 years because creating us, he knew, okay, I'm going to make this person have to be able to sleep.
Yeah.
So they,
Yeah.
you know, this amount of time to sleep and, you know, eat and whatever
But
to
he wasn't,
stay alive.
didn't have those things.
Right.
This is just a snapshot view into what our family vacation next week is going to be.
I was just wondering what it'd be like to be all you together.
It's entertaining.
So my Bible says just that, it says the Bible does not say how long these time periods were. The real question, however, is not how long God took, but how he did it. God created the earth in an orderly fashion, and he created men and women as unique, capable beings. So it's really not, it says, it's not important how long God took to create the world, whether it's a few days or a billion years, but he created it the way he wanted it.
Nice.
So, my soapbox on this, whenever I end up in this conversation with somebody, is God gave you 2 chapters of the Bible to decide this, right? How big is the Bible? 66 different authors, or 66 different books, sorry, and however many authors throughout those books, right? Throughout the entire Bible. How many thousands of pages, and you get 2 chapters with one author to tell you how he created the world. What do you think he's trying to tell you about the importance and where you should put the stock in your theology and your study of your doctrines throughout the Bible? Okay? So I think a lot of Christians are guilty of what they call a slippery slope argument, where basically if you find one thing to be true or not true, then you can deduct that about everything else that could follow, or that is related or not related. Okay? And it's called a slippery slope argument, and it's not true. Okay? So what we're not allowed to do, even if, thought experiment, even if we found a lot of things about Genesis to be, Genesis 1 and 2 to be relatively different than what we originally thought it to be, does it change the resurrection of Jesus Christ? Absolutely not. Not even the same author, guys. Totally different author, right? God working through them, obviously, don't get me wrong, okay? But God utilizing Paul, utilizing John, and utilizing Mark, those people, right? So that's kind of my soapbox on it. Yes, it's important. I think it's important. I wouldn't have brought it up today for a conversation if it wasn't important, right? But God's trying to tell you, I created. Let's move on. Let's talk about what I created, right? So I love talking about it. I've written pages and pages and pages and pages of information to people about it, right? Because a lot of people get really interested in this, and I'm not denying that. It's just in reality. I think we can put our stock in some other things, okay? I got you guys over time, so let's pray. And obviously, I'm at the end of an email, I'm at the end of a phone line if you have some questions or if I round some real internal passions that you guys want to talk about, okay? Father, thank you so much for this evening. I thank you for all of my brothers and sisters in this room. Lord, I thank you that they can sit here and put up with me. Lord, I thank you for your truth. That you are a God of our hearts, but you are also a God of our minds, that you can reach out to us and that you want to leave no doubt left untouched, no doubt uncovered, that you truly love us and that you want us to reach out for you and to ask the big questions of what you've done and how you created. Lord, I ask that some of these arguments around you, Lord, that we can use them. That we can use the minds that you indwell with these concepts, or we can use these concepts towards those who might be in question for you. That we can use these concepts, Lord, to make room for some trust in you, for someone, whether that's already one of us, whether that's already a Christian, whether that's somebody who says Jesus is real and did come, or that's somebody who wonders or is willing to hear it. Give us the courage and the strength to do it. Lord, use us. Use us this week. Use us this month. Use us this year. Use us for your glory in whatever manner that pleases you. I love you, God. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen. Okay, thanks, guys.